Thank you very much, Shanta, for joining us. It's a very interesting time to be here. And you are at Mobility for Africa, and you are the intersection of China, tech, and Zimbabwe, which means Africa. So, as the co-founder of Mobility for Africa, what is the role that you think Chinese tech will play or is playing in Africa's shift to EVs?
So thank you, first of all, for having me. It's very exciting. Just to sort of maybe give some context, I was very fortunate to work in Beijing from 2014 to 2017. And obviously this was a period where China was already moving quite quickly in the electric mobility space. And I was sort of blown away by how they had solved so many transport challenges and mobility challenges, both urban and rural. So to take, for example, the tricycle, the Sandlicher, this had been once pedal, it had gone to petrol, and while I was there, it was becoming electric. And it's basically, it means that every family in rural China has a form of transport. They have a tricycle, they can go home at night and charge it, and during the day they can use it to get to their fields, they can go to the local market, they can do it for a multitude of different things that rural people need. And I mean, obviously in urban areas, you saw the advent of, scooters and e-bikes and, I mean, complementing already amazing public transport, buses, subways. So to me, it was like just a wake-up call. And I have been working in Africa for most of my life since I was 22. And,
Wow.
and yeah, I'm old. And 30 years. And I was like, why can't we leverage some of this experience? So in some ways, I mean, when you see how transport and mobility is ubiquitous in China, it's a no-brainer that the continent can learn and leverage a lot. I think what's interesting is that China lifted millions of people out of poverty in the last 30 to 40 years. It wouldn't have happened without investment in infrastructure and transport. It was critical to rural farmers being able to access better markets, so we can learn a lot from them. So this was sort of the beginning of this journey, and it's been much more difficult, obviously, because while China has had huge success in this sector, Africa is a very different context. But yeah, so Ninja, I mean, just to say that it's a really exciting time in electric mobility in Africa.
I can imagine. Having been to China, that is where the idea for the e-mobility, e-tricycles was born. And I had this question on, because China has been in the lead in many of these EV transitions in African countries. A lot of tech, batteries, bodies, and all that come from China. What advice you are sourcing from China and not other countries like in Europe or in the US?
Okay, so I think first of all, I mean, we've been on a journey with Chinese partners. From the beginning, this is not about importing. It's about building an ecosystem to sustain the transition to green transport in the continent, okay? We have a huge mobility crisis to solve. We have a deficit of transport. We have, 44 vehicles per 1,000 people, which is the lowest in the world. America has 800 and something, So we are grappling with a huge deficit that has huge economic and social costs. So we need to start thinking about the opportunity that e-mobility provides by thinking differently about a couple of different things. One is that how does it solve the unmet transport needs, and how do we leverage it for better public transport in urban areas, better shared transport, better green transport, better affordable, accessible transport? And the petrol never allowed us to do that. Petrol's always been imported. It's expensive. It was a barrier to thinking out of the box. Now we need to think out of the box. But it's not just about where is the best technology. I mean, the fact is Europe and the US and everyone else is scrounging now to prioritize their own e-mobility, right? The Americans have, got new incentives for companies to invest in America's transition. China is, produces 80% of the world's cells. They're leading. They're 10 years advantage. They are willing to work with, they have overcapacity, so they're willing to work with whoever is interested. And so it's about Africa leveraging the technology transfer and building an ecosystem to suit the transition in Africa, which is different than buying off the shelf. I mean, we started with a tricycle that was off the shelf, and we started with the lead acid battery that was off the shelf, because in China, this type of mobility is used by the poorest people, and they go home in rural areas and they have electricity, and it's easy for them to charge a phone. It's to charge their battery. So it doesn't matter if they've got a lead acid battery that doesn't go very far and lasts them a year. But it's very, very different when you come to rural Africa and we don't have power. People at a household maybe have a solar panel, but they definitely don't have enough capacity to charge anything more. And lead acid, for example, we tested and tried lead acid and we quickly realized it wasn't going to work. So what we've been doing is working with a Chinese technology partner. We did a mapping of the space. We were very, very fortunate to find a startup, bigger startup than me, but a really amazing engineer, Richard Zhao, who basically was willing to go on this journey. And we've been working together to test solutions that will work in a rural African context. And now we're focused on how to make sure we have the skills locally to repair, recycle, and maintain the batteries and the charging infrastructure, so that we can scale. And we're building the ecosystem for many others to succeed. It cannot just be an import business. That won't work wherever it comes from Europe, I don't care, America. No one's going to be actually designing for Africa unless we do it ourselves. So that's the big premise. Or India's moving quickly. There's a lot of great technology we can leverage, but we have to find the resources to invest in the R&D. And that's been a challenge, to be frank with you. We have been on a 5-year journey. It's been far longer than I thought, because everyone expects startups in Africa to have the business model sorted before you've even invested in R&D and built new markets. So that's part of our challenge. We need to work with strategic partners that believe in testing and trying and building for the African context.
All right. And you've mentioned that you work with an engineer on the batteries, and I guess this is the ex-Tesla, Rishan Zhao.
Yes.
So, and he is Chinese. So, and you have mentioned a bit about technology transfer, and you're looking to moving from just importing, but creating from and within Africa. How is this process for you?
Well, so look, what happened is, through trial and error, I learned about batteries, which I knew nothing about when I started this journey. We tested off the shelf, and we realized that off the shelf lithium is not, the batteries are very different products. So we did a mapping. Obviously the big guys, the BYDs, the CATLs, I'm not going to talk to a startup that's wanting to import 200 batteries. They've got, it's about scale and volume. They're talking to the big guys, the big OEMs that are all in a rush now. So we were very, very lucky to find Richard, who runs a company called Zen Energy, because he was not only, he's an amazing qualified engineer who'd worked for Tesla, as you mentioned, did his PhD in Texas on lithium storage, but he was willing to take a chance and work with us. And we're still on that journey. We still have a lot of work to do. I think, there's a buzz at the moment Africa's woken up to the fact we once again will be the supplier of a lot of raw materials. I'm sitting here in Zimbabwe. We have very high quality lithium. We've started, 2 mines have started processing lithium into carbonate. But the reality is that you, just because you produce a mineral doesn't mean it's going to be, the beneficiation is going to happen locally, unless you have very thoughtful strategic policies. And secondly, most of these big mines have off-taker agreements. So the lithium's already been sold before you even start producing it. So what we are believing, though, is that if you are exporting your lithium, as Zimbabwe is to China, for the value added and chemistry of cell production, it's all very complicated, will cost lots of money. But let's start with the basics. Let's make sure that rural people understand and benefit from the lithium. It may not be from here, it might be from Australia, but that doesn't matter. They have access to lithium batteries that will help them in their lives. It's not just exported and hopefully, there's a school built. Let's be more ambitious. So I think the good news is that what we're trying to do is we're starting with local assembly, which, quite a few companies in East Africa are already doing, of course. They're bringing in the cells, they're adding the battery management system. And then, of course, you're building young technicians that start to understand what a battery management system is, how to make sure you look after that battery, understand how the energy supply works. And, of course, then we build the ecosystem for recycling. So it's an ambitious plan. And we believe that we were lucky. It doesn't matter whether it was Chinese or British, but the fact is we know that China has the leading skill set. So we've had Chinese engineers come with us, with Richard's team, spend time with us. They will basically be holding our hands, helping us train our young Zimbabwean engineers. So it's a process. And, we started actually, we launched our project in 2019 with a partnership with Tsinghua University with students. And it's great because not only is it about the technology, it's about people to people. We've gone into this crazy world where everyone is afraid of everyone. And, it's so wonderful to have, people come and live and spend time with us and get out to rural areas and learn, and for my colleagues here to learn from their Chinese. It's a cross-cultural experience that I think is invaluable as well.
All right. I think I know that banner down there, Mobility imports tricycles from China, but you import the parts and assemble them, right?
We do. So we started from the very beginning with the tricycle. So we've had a battery assembly plant here since 2019. And we actually were the first certified factory. We worked hard to get the government to remove the import duties for tricycles. So Zimbabwe had a gap. So you could get import waivers for local assembly of 2-wheelers and 4-wheelers, but not for 3-wheelers. So we're very proud of that. So we helped to get a law passed so that it benefit the industry as a whole.
All right. And I believe that because you focus on women, when women set their minds to doing something, it gets done. And this is a beautiful thing to see in Zimbabwe. Now, there is something about the batteries and the range that they run from, what just flashed over there, that you offer 100+ kilometers range, moving 300 to 400 kilograms of whatever load. And these are going to last for 8,000 to 10,000 cycles. So for somebody who does not understand what these cycles are these the charges, the number of times you charge, or what is this?
So on my journey on our journey of learning through trial and error, we realized that we needed a couple of things. So we needed a battery that was very safe chemistry, because batteries can be very flammable. So we worked with Richard to use the safest lithium ferrophosphate chemistry. There's different types of chemistry. If you're driving a Tesla, you want speed. I didn't want speed, I wanted safety.
Yeah.
Then we also knew that in rural areas of Zimbabwe where we'd been testing, that distances are quite long. So it depends on how you go deeper rural. So obviously peri-urban distances of 5 to 7 kilometres on average. But if you're in a rural area, you might need to go 20 to 30 kilometres on one trip. So we said, let's look at a battery size that will take the Hamba with a load that distance. Now, the tricycles are not motorbikes, so they go slowly. But the other benefit of a tricycle is a woman doesn't need a motorbike license. And so this is a huge barrier to entry for most women in accessing transport, because getting a license, I'm sure in Kenya, but here it's very expensive and it takes time. You have to go to an urban area. And so our rural customers would not even be benefiting from this. So going back to the batteries, though, we said we wanted distance, we wanted safety, and we didn't want to for them to fall apart. So a battery's it's a discharge, or it cycles how many times you charge it, right? So it goes 100 kilometers and then you need to charge it. And essentially that is a huge question for everyone to ask when they buy a battery, because we started with lithium batteries off the shelf that went 800 cycles, which, to be frank, did not work. They blew up. They were not meant for rural roads, which are very bumpy. They were meant for storage. And so essentially we quickly discovered that even if they said they were going to last 8,000 cycles, there was nothing to benchmark. So what Richard has developed, he himself has successfully created a patent on cell chemistry that helps batteries last longer. So the plan at the moment is, a battery will, as the discharge cycles go up, the battery performance will obviously start to lower. So, we anticipate, we haven't checked this yet, we're now monitoring our batteries. We have a battery management system that checks the degradation and the life cycle. But essentially, what we are hoping is that we can do at least 50 to 60,000 kilometres in the tricycle before you would put the battery in, and maybe instead of going 100 kilometres, it might only go 70. So then you're going to take that battery and use it for second life. So that still might have a whole range of different types of mobile energy storages. And this is where I get really excited, because I'm very ambitious about this continent, and I get a bit frustrated that people aren't. 5 kilowatts of energy, it's a big battery, but it can take that Hamba 100 kilometres. It could also charge a lot of power tools that could help small-scale farmers as they increase their productivity, save them hours of wasted time using old antiquated tools. So there's so much potential with mobile energy storage and battery use for rural communities. So we're hoping that our batteries will last 10 to 15 years. I mean, if you're talking 10,000 cycles, that's charging it once a day for 15 years. So what's critical is we're not selling the batteries. We manage the batteries through a battery swapping system, because obviously, as I said, rural people don't have the power anyway, but it allows us to manage their performance. It means that you, as the driver of the tricycle, don't take all of the problems that come with managing a battery. We'll provide the security of a full charge. You pay a small fee, and essentially we're responsible for making that battery work optimally, making sure it's not, it performs and it ultimately is recycled.
All right, that's that's beautiful. I mean, understanding the chemistry behind the battery functions and everything like that. For some of us who dropped the sciences because we could not handle chemistry or physics, then this is interesting to hear. And
that's me, though. Just by the way, I did terribly at all of those subjects. So some days I wake up going, "Who am I? How did I learn this?" I'm a bit of a slow learner sometimes. Richard has to explain it to me 5 times before it really clicks.
I can imagine how crazy some of the things we find ourselves doing, and you're like, 30 years ago, I would never have thought about this. But then again, because this technology is very interesting, and we've talked about technology transfer. If I may ask, regarding the assembling and the parts, what advised you going to China for the importations and not other countries? Is it cost factor? Is it the quality? What was it?
Well, so obviously, as I said, I had a history and was driven by my experiences in China. I would say, look, it's very, very hard from any sort of price point to compete with China. I mean, even people have asked me about, the steel for the tricycles, and we're looking at localization of components here for the tricycles, but it's a huge challenge to do that in a cost-effective way. So, that's the long-term plan. But, unfortunately, the reality in this continent is we went through a period of deindustrialization, and, so it requires a huge investment if you're going to make everything locally. So at the moment, what we've been doing is we've been making modifications to the tricycle, and we're looking at localization of certain components based on what works where best. But, I mean, in terms of batteries, look, the chemistry around cells, it's a complicated mix of different minerals. It requires a lot of energy. It requires, it's not that it can't be done in this continent. Of course, we should start moving in that direction, but it's not going to happen overnight. So what I do think is, my advice is, we need to really start investing. I mean, so as an individual, do your homework. But I think as we look at the policy regulatory space, there's been a lot of push now towards, obviously, countries coming up with EV policies. I know Kenya's working on yours. A lot of Zambia just introduced tax-free incentives for 3 to 4-wheelers and 2-wheelers. There's a lot of momentum building. We helped Zimbabwe to write their EV policy. Everyone wants the value added and the job creation, but it's not going to happen just because you have a policy. It's going to happen because you systematically build alliances with the right academic partnerships, and you build training courses, and you develop, structured ways of leveraging technology and bringing it to the continent. And so I sort of get worried sometimes, because I think everyone wants a quick fix, and the whole electric transport system has huge opportunities. And obviously it's critical for climate justice and the climate transition. But at the moment, what I see is, there's some great companies in this space. You and Kenya are home to many of the, the revolution happening in the 2-wheeler motorbike space. You've got bus companies now. And there's a lot of stuff proving that it can work, but there's still a lot more to be done. Where are we seeing the new courses for young people to understand what energy is, what a battery is, how are we going to transition mechanics from, ICE to support this new ecosystem? How are we going to rethink transport, so it's not just about replacing a petrol-driven car, but instead thinking creatively how we meet the huge deficit. So I also think, to be frank with you, the other thing is there's been a lot of talk about what the input requirements and safety standards should be. Because obviously South Africa imported huge amounts of batteries in the last year alone because the load shedding has been so bad. And now there's financing for homes to, invest in their own off-grid. The challenge is it's not that we need to reinvent standards. We just need to enforce standards. We need to make sure it comes with the right certification. There's global certifications for export. Only a couple of shipping companies will ship batteries because they've major fires at sea. So, the rules are there, but I think in the African context, who is going to work on the recycling policy? Who's going to make sure we're not just dumping toxic waste? Who's going got to ensure some safety standards and make sure people are selling what they say they're selling and not, selling batteries that are really not equipped to last. So there's a lot of issues around this that need to be thought through. And I don't know where the leadership's going to come from. At the moment, there's individual countries, but I do think we need a much more continental approach, Pan-African. I always say I'd like to have a Pan-African EV czar, and I know we have the AU, and they're great sometimes, but, we need this to be, we can't just all be competing in our little countries and hoping we're going to leverage the type of technology transfer we need. Because, as we're too many different markets. It doesn't, we don't leverage our volume or our scale then.
And you're looking to increase the number of vehicles that you have, the tricycles that you have. You had some milestones that you had laid out, and so far you have about, is it like 8,000? What is the number? I forgot.
No, it's very small, and we're behind schedule. So I'm finishing 2023 a bit upset with myself, to be frank with you. But we've learned a lot. It's just a bit, we had to build a new battery management system, which has taken time. But essentially, we currently have about 190 Hambas operational across 4 sites, one peri-urban, one sort of with the dairy sector working in the eastern part of Zimbabwe, and one with rural farmers about 160 kilometres away. So we have a lot of different evidence. 2024, we have we have another 200 tricycles to get out within the first quarter. So we have a couple of sites identified. We've also been sort of looking at what the business model is, because we didn't want to just buy and sell. We wanted to build fleets that could service rural areas. So we choose a rural area, we put in the infrastructure for off-grid charging. It's usually mixed charging. So you have a combination of solar and ZESA. You then do the battery swapping from that location. And we've had drivers either renting or being leased to purchase, but also transport and logistics. Because basically one of the problems is that everyone thinks rural people are too poor. So that's why, for example, look at what's happening in Kenya. You've got 30, 40 companies working in the boda sector, but they're all based in Nairobi and a few in Mombasa. Everyone thinks I'm crazy, because you're like, why are you going rural? Why are you talking women? I'm like, okay, well, the women bit I don't understand, because we are the most productive, and African women are by far the smartest business people I know. But then you're also looking at, rural is where food is grown. It's where productivity should be the greatest. It contributes to the greatest part of a country's GDP outside of mining. So how are we not investing in building and linking transport to help productivity? And so we've been working with agro business. So we've been working with dairy farmers, for example. They need to get their dairy to the milk centre. They can only carry 20 litres on their head, but if they've got a tricycle, the neighbours and the woman can carry, 300 litres. So we're trying to come up with solutions that service the aggregate need in a community of transport, not just the individual, because we want those tricycles moving 8 hours a day, not just because you're the richest person in the village that you sit and have your tricycle sitting there all day, which is a big problem in the history of car ownership. We drive to work and then the car sits there for 8 hours. So we want to change this and prove rural mobility is financially viable, profitable, and has a direct link to social outcomes. And I mean, we've seen that where we've worked. I mean, women can earn more money. They can trade. They can move around. They can sell and buy. They can get more tomatoes to the market to increase their incomes. So there are ways to finance it, but I mean, Zim's obviously a hard country. It's a great country, but it's a hard country to get some of the investment that goes to Kenya. I get a bit jealous sometimes of your Kenyan startups, and obviously, it's rural as well. Rural people are and we're not ambitious. We've got to be more ambitious for our rural community.
And there's one question, and yes, ambition is important, because if we have to transition and transition successfully, then ambition has to be part of that. But there's one question we cannot leave this conversation without me asking, in terms of, actually two questions, but in terms of R&D, how much of your team is involved in R&D? Are these Chinese? Are these Americans? Are these Zimbabweans? And then the second question is, how big is your team, and what is the composition? Because there is also the technology transfer that is spoken about. So how many Chinese do you have on the team, and how many do you have as Africans?
So basically, we have a small team, very young team here. I've been blessed with a lot of students who have evolved from interns into staff. So my two engineers, our lead engineer, was started as an intern on attachment. I've just employed another student graduate from the engineering department of University of Zimbabwe. So we have around 23, 24 people. Wow. So it's not huge, because that's servicing our sites. We hire locally in the community, and then we train them on battery maintenance. And so essentially, and then with Zen Energy, we have basically, COVID was tough because obviously people couldn't travel. Richard has a team. He has a much larger team in Changzhou, which is sort of in just an hour from Shanghai, but one of the sort of new energy centers in China. So basically, we've been very lucky. Ethan, who's the project manager, has been coming every 6 weeks. And we've had secondments of engineers that have stayed for 2 months. And hopefully in 2024, we'll have a full-time engineer on secondment. And obviously, I'm looking forward to sending some of my team to China also to learn and experience. So it's small, and yeah, we're ambitious for a small team. We've been lucky. We've raised some grant funding. We've been raised some equity investment money now. But obviously, it's a hardware capex heavy business, e-mobility. It's not just a quick fix with the digital. So essentially, we don't want to fail, because if we fail, I'm worried that it might take a lot longer for people to start investing in rural and women e-mobility. They might think, let's wait because we can make more money quickly in urban, so we won't worry about pushing this. And my big feeling is that we don't have time to waste. It's not whether e-mobility should be urban or rural. It should be both. We have a green transition to make happen. We need to build resilience in all our communities. And so we are under huge pressure. We do not want to fail. So we have a lot to do in 2024.
It has to be done, and it has to be done because it's all possible when we push ourselves to become whatever we want to become. And this means even in the businesses that we do. Thank you so much, Shatha Bloemen, the co-founder of Mobility for Africa. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. Unless there is a question that you feel I've left out, or something you really wanted to say and I didn't have it covered in my questioning.
I know at the moment there's sort of a new beginning of a Cold War happening in the way people view China and this competition with the US. Africa cannot afford to be part of this competition. It's not a zero-sum game. And I'm agnostic. I work with wherever we find good people that believe in what we're doing. It doesn't matter what their nationality is. And I think, there are... I think it's where we can leverage the most as a continent. And I think, there's a lot we can leverage from China if we build the right partnerships. So just to say, I sometimes worry that, people get fixated on, and I refuse to play that game. I think if we need to be smart and not join some Cold War outdated zero-sum game.
Shatha Bloemen, the co-founder of Mobility for Africa, challenging us that we are better together instead of, pulling aside and everybody their way. Thank you so much. My name is Njenga Hakina, the climate editor at China Global South Project in Africa. I'm in Nairobi, and I have been with Shatha. Very insightful conversation, and I look forward to speaking with you again soon. Because this space that we are in is evolving and it keeps changing. So you have those batteries that are phosphate and lithium. Tomorrow they could be something else. So we have to keep up with all this that is changing and happening in these aspects.